Hey folks, welcome to the Prepatch Demonology guide. We'll be covering pretty much everything that you need to know for the pre-patch, so without any further delay, let's get into it. So before we start and discuss the legendaries, a bit of a preamble and a forewarning. Talents take priority over legendaries, so depending on the build you run, your legendaries will shift here and there depending on the content you're doing. There is a icyveins article which I will post in the description below that confirms this, and a shout out to Shipwreck for commenting on the affliction guide that I did previously that kind of discussed this, because there's a little bit of confusion. So to demonstrate on the PTR currently, I have Dread Calling currently talented, and I also have the Grim Inquisitor's Dread Calling legendary. They both have the same effect, but to show that they don't stack, we're going to spend some shards and we're going to watch this particular buff up here, Dread Calling currently. You'll notice that the icon is different from the one that is currently in game. The reason for this is because they're not stacking. This is the talent variant. So you can see that it was stacking there to 36%. And we'll summon our Dreadstalkers. Buff disappears. Now what we're going to do is we're going to leave the legendary on, and we're going to move the point around. So you can see that we're no longer talented into it. Instead, we've got inner demons. That won't really make too much of a difference. But now, if we cast a few Shadow Bolts, you can see that we actually have a different icon. We actually have Grim Inquisitor's Dread Calling as a buff here. So you can see that unfortunately they do not stack, and we instead just get one or the other. With that in mind then, let's just destroy these and get to the actual legendaries in question then that we might see use. So Grim Inquisitors obviously still works, so there will be a point, depending on the build that you run, where you probably won't talent, or you can avoid talenting into Dread Calling itself. But generally speaking, we're more likely to see a case, especially in Mythic Plus, where we actually run Implosive Potential, because that gives us the best of both worlds. We have both Grim Inquisitors in the form of huge dog damage, but we also have Implosive Potential's haste gain. There is also an argument to be made to be running Wilfrids and just having the extra Tyrant if you're actually going to talent into your Tyrant. There will be a conversation about Tyrant when we get to the build section, so don't worry too much about that. Alternatively, we may just see something like the Forces of Horned Nightmare used, because although we do have that as a talent, because of where that talent is located, again, down here, Pact of the Imp Mother, we don't necessarily have the points to spend freely early on. Because remember, we are missing about 5 points at the end of our tree due to the fact that, we're not capped yet, and we will be in Dragonflight. So the legendaries that you're likely to see the most use out of going forward will either remain to be Wilfrids, Implosive Potential, and probably Forces of Horned Nightmare, as you're likely to have Grim Inquisitor's Dread Calling for most things. There is the option potentially to use Balespider's Burning Core, but again, that is a legendary that we do have access to within our talent tree. Relic of Synergy, again, that's another one we have access to through the class tree anyway. And for our Unity, either in the form of Shard of Annihilation or Decaying Soul Satchel, unlike Affliction, we don't have Decaying Soul Satchel in our talent tree, which means we get to enjoy that for a little while longer. Now, while we're talking about Decaying Soul Satchel and Covenants, it's still pretty much the same, either Nightfare or Necrolord. That hasn't changed. What has changed, however, is the Conduits. So we don't really have anything similar to Tyrant Soul, so Tyrant Soul will remain, but depending on which tree you go and where you go, having Carnivorous Stalkers or Born of Blood can be interchangeable. We're likely to keep Soul Eater at this point rather than having the traditional 3-stack that we're used to of Born of Blood, Carnivorous Stalkers, and Tyrant Soul, because Born of Blood is in fact called something else now, and it's called Demonic Knowledge. Now, although they're called two different things, we don't think there's going to be, doubling the chance so that you don't have a 30% chance to generate a charge of Demonic Core or anything like that. So it's going to be one or the other, because they share the same icon, like Dread Calling and Grim Inquisitors. So, depending on your build, like you can see here that this particular build in question, which we will discuss in a moment, I haven't talented in to Carnivorous Stalkers. This is because this allows me to use the Conduit still, which is kind of the goal. So, again, bit like Affliction, there is a little bit of scope in terms of what conduits to use, but it's not groundbreaking. A lot of it will still be things like making sure that you get Dream Delver or the actual effects from your Soulbind rather than the conduits themselves. But there's a little bit of room to play with. Not quite as dumb as having a 1-minute Dark Lair because Corrupting Leer finally gets used, but hey ho. Anyway, let's get into the builds. So, starting with the starter build then, when you first start with Demonology, this is the build Blizzard is essentially going to throw your way, which is fairly serviceable. You can see that you've got Dread Calling for a starter, Demonic Knowledge, Implosion, Demonic Forces, Rip Through the Portal, so you've got your extra dog. So we do have our tier sets, remember, we have our third little good boy, our fell boy, as it were, and also gives us Wilfred's in the form of Grand Warlock's Design. This is just Wilfred's superior summoning legendary that we're all accustomed to. It does rival Reign of Tyranny, but we'll discuss that a little bit more when we go through a proper build. It also gives us Inner Demons and Imp Gang Boss, so it's a serviceable build very early on. There's a few things that you're missing that would kind of enhance the gameplay, as it were, but would be easy enough to fill out as you're leveling. So if you're new to Demonology, the Demonology part of the starter tree is great. Now, we've already kind of discussed a little bit about the Affliction version of the class tree. This is going to be the same no matter what spec within Warlock you're running, but there's a few things that Blizzard have missed out. So we're going to remove the points, and we're going to go through it at a slightly faster pace than we did for Affliction. If you want to understand any of the bits that I miss and why they're important, please do go have a look at the Affliction class section, and hopefully that'll answer any questions. If not, comment below. But 2 points in Demon Skin, 2 points in Fell Armor, you're going to want 1 in Curse of Enfeeblement. That thing is where Blizzard starts telling you that you're deviating from the path, because you can see that it originally wanted to highlight Fell Domination, where we went to first. So, Mortal Coil, Demonic Fortitude, Wrathful Minion. Now, thing here, this has opened up slightly early because of a UI problem. When I first opened up the PTR today, it was saying that there were points in Demonic Knowledge. This is just flat baseline to us, but it will even out down here. So don't worry too much if you're watching this video and going, hang on a second. Demonic Embrace, Demonic Inspiration, Sweet Souls, Dark Pact, Frequent Donor, because of the synergy between Frequent Donor's 40 or reduction on Dark Pact, so it's 45 seconds, and Mortal Coil. Really good combination. You're then going to want to take Demonic Gateway, Shadow Fury, 2 points in Lifeblood, and then we have 3 floater points essentially. Now, these floater points, bit of a tongue twister there. Generally speaking, you're going to go in Fell Domination and Burning Rush. Burning Rush because we lose Soul Shape, so we're going to need the mobility again, and Fell Domination because, let's face it, 6 and a bit second long demon summons is just pain in the ass. And we have 1 floater point. You could go into something like Banish, but generally speaking, Strength of Will will probably be your go-to. Then pick up Soul Link. You're going to want 2 points in Grimoire Synergy, because you're going to have your Felguard out all the time. This is just a hard pick. 2 points in Soul Conduit. The chance to refund a shard is great. And then we have 1 floater at level 60. This floating point gives you a few options. Now, there is discussions that Teachings of the Black Harvest, especially in a Mythic Plus setting, could see some use. It's not a direct damage increase in any way, shape or form, but having your Felguard have its pursuit, so its gap closer, reduced by 5 seconds, and its maximum range increased, means that your Felguard is going to be able to move around a little bit faster, which, given how our damage profile looks and where a lot of our damage is going to be coming from going forward, and the emphasis on our pet, this does mean that his uptime is going to net you a DPS gain. Alternatively, having something like Summon Soulkeeper or Inquisitor's Gaze, these are direct damaging abilities that you will do, and they're a little bit of extra damage. If you just want something passive, having Inquisitor's Gaze is just nice. Make sure that you've got it up every hour, a bit like a Mage's Familiar, and things like that. Not particularly common talent as it was taken, but still, it does a little bit of damage occasionally, and it lasts an hour. Alternatively, if you want to play a little bit more defensively, you could pick up something like False Energy, which causes your Soul Leech to heal you. So this floater point, entirely up to you. Generally speaking, I'd just go in Inquisitor's Gaze and pick Teachings of the Black Harvest if I really, really need to improve that uptime. So we'll apply the changes, and then we will discuss the actual demonology tree itself by removing the points. Because unfortunately, the one thing that I didn't mention in the affliction guide is you can't partially apply points. If you're going to apply changes, you have to spend every point before you can. Slightly irritating if you want to save things partially way through. So like if I wanted to give you guys a partial build, for instance, that looked something along the lines of this, with 10 points to spare, and be like, if you wanted to fill out the rest, say for instance you really like playing with Inner Demons, you want to Dread Callings and Imp Gang Boss, so you have this kind of passive constant amount of pets rather than having your Grim of Felguard, Fellstorm Reduction, and Felsunder, where your Fellstorm increases the damage that your pets do for a period of time, then you could use this build. But unfortunately, it won't let you. And you can't share incomplete builds either. So you've kind of got to point out where you might have floater points and let people make their own decisions from there, especially if you're wanting to share them. But anyway, let's go back into the actual thing. So you obviously have Call Dreadstalkers. That's fine, main ability. Dread Lash, we're pretty much used to this as it is part of our dog build. We're going to need Demon Bolt. You've got Anilian Training. This is your Fel Commando conduit, essentially. It's just obviously been renamed. So Felguard deals 10% more damage and takes 10% less. You then have From the Shadows going this way. Fel and Steel. Your Fellstorm and Dreadbite deal 20% additional damage. You then have Shadow's Bite, so when summoned your Dreadstalkers fade away, they increase the damage of your Demon Bolt. You've got Demonic Knowledge, Implosion, and this is where things get a little bit hit and miss. So we're going to go with a AoE / Mythic Plus build, which means we're going to want Demonic Knowledge and we're going to want Implosion. Now, this particular choice, Summon Vile Fiend versus Soul Strike, depends on whereabouts you're going in terms of your capstones. Down here, we have Antoran Armaments. Now, if you're planning into going into Antoran Armaments, Soul Strike is better, because until you get to this point, both abilities are single target. However, when you get down to Antoran Armaments, Soul Strike will cleave. So that is something you need to bear in mind. You then also have Demonic Strength or Bilescourge Bombers. Demonic Strength is better, but it does have an interaction with one of our bottom capstone traits that we will need to discuss. 2 points in Demonic Calling, because we want free Dreadstalkers. Demonic Meteor. Rip Through the Portal, because we want our third dog. Grim of Felguard. Felsunder, because each time Fellstorm deals damage. This also takes into account Demonic Strength, because remember, Demonic Strength is just a more powerful Fellstorm. Increases the damage the target takes from you and your pets by 2% for 8 seconds, stacking up to 10%. So it stacks up to 5 times. And between your Fellstorm and your Demonic Strength, you can have a reasonable amount of uptime, and it becomes really strong when it comes to like your Tyrant windows. Now, we have 3 points to spend. You can pick, or in Dragonflight, you will be picking Carnivorous Stalkers. And then you have 2 more points to spend to open up. Now, because we're going for a Mythic Plus build, we're going to want Dread Calling, and we're going to have the dogs build as we know it. This then leaves us with 5 points. Now, you have a couple of options. Obviously, we have our Tyrant. Now, the tooltip for Tyrant is wrong here. It says it generates 5 shards as it is, but it doesn't unless you put 2 points into Soulbound Tyrant. The first point generates 3 shards and the second point generates 5. This then opens you up to either Reign of Tyranny or Grand Warlock's Design. But if we're playing Mythic Plus and we're after a more AoE-centric build, going into Antoran Armaments to allow for Soulstrike Cleave, your Felguard deals an additional 20% damage, and Soulstrike now deals 25% of its damage to nearby enemies. Infernal Command, while your Felguard is active, your Wild Imps and Dreadstalkers deal 20% additional damage. And obviously Dreadstalkers is an intrinsic part of our damage, and has been. And then we can also pick up Guillotine. By this particular build, we still have a Tyrant, so it increases the damage of our pet, but our Tyrant won't actually give us shards, which can be slightly problematic. So there's every possibility that you could see, for a Mythic Plus build, you actually just drop your Tyrant to pick up something else that you find is slightly more beneficial, whether it be Bloodbound Imps, to increase the chance of receiving Demonic Core from Wild Imps, whether it be them naturally expiring, because it's 5% if they naturally expire, or 10% when imploded, which means you could be constantly gaining Demonic Core procs through this. So it inadvertently improves your mobility. Alternatively, you could have Demonic Tyrant if you want the single target damage. Now, we were discussing the thing that we needed, or we briefly touched on the conflict that Demonic Strength has, and that is with Guillotine. The way it works at the moment is if you have one active over the other, so if you have Demonic Strength active and then try to use Guillotine, it will cancel Demonic Strength to then just go straight into Guillotine. Because Demonic Strength, he needs his weapon to Fellstorm, essentially, whereas Guillotine, you are throwing, your Felguard is throwing its weapon to the ground to pulse AoE damage, and then while unarmed, it is doing faster basic attacks. It attacks 50% faster, and those attacks cleave. Alternatively, if you have Guillotine out and you try to Demonic Strength goes on cooldown, but nothing happens. So, as highlighted by a few other Warlocks, Blizzard need to do something. They either need to spell queue it or make it so that one ability can't be used while the other is in effect. Not the greatest, but still, it's not too shabby, and both do a substantial amount of damage, especially when you consider that they're both, you have a 45-second cooldown and you have a minute-long cooldown. So realistically, as long as you don't try and use them together at the same time to begin with, they should never interact with each other too adversely. Because it could be a case of you use one for one pack, one for the other, depending on the speed you're obviously going through content. But this, in and of itself, is a fairly good Mythic Plus AoE-centric build. So we will save this. So that we can share it later. Now, let's go into a single target build. And to do that, if we actually just drop points there for a moment, so we can move things around. If we're running a single target build, we don't need Implosion. And as a result, we can also free up Demonic Knowledge if we don't want to use it. Because again, remember, we do have the Conduit Born of Blood for the time being. What this means is it opens us up to have a few extra points. As you see, we need 2 more before we can move down a tier. Now, this allows for a few options. You could either go into something like Fell Might, reducing the cooldown of Fellstorm by 10 seconds, because remember, the Felguard pet cooldown for it is 30 seconds. Reducing it by 10 seconds puts it to 20 seconds. And between that and Fellsunder, you're seeing that you're getting 8 seconds out of every 20, which isn't too bad. That's almost pushing a 50% uptime, especially when you start adding demonic strengths through fights and things like that, which is ideal for cooldown usage. But having it on a 30-second cooldown ain't too shabby. Because as you can see, we talent out of it, and it goes up to 30 seconds. So, but having these 2 points, you could go into something like Inner Demons, because this allows you to just have a slightly bigger menagerie, or you could go into Hounds of War. Shadowbolt and Demon Bolt have a 5% chance to reset the cooldown on Dreadstalkers. This just allows for more dogs through the course of a fight, which would be ideal. Personally, I'd probably end up seeing more use in it being Inner Demons, and maybe one in in-game boss. The reason for this is because having 1 point in Inner Demons, it doesn't really change how many imps you have out. You passively summon wild imps to fight for you. What does change is you, while in combat, you also have a 5% chance to summon an additional demon to fight for you with 1 point, or 10% if you stack it up to twice. Imp Gang Boss is similar in that summoning a wild imp has a 5% chance to summon an Imp Gang Boss. Instead, an Imp Gang Boss deals 20% additional damage. When imploded, it will summon another wild imp. Putting 2 points in it just doubles the effect. So if you wanted to, you'd run something like this if you really wanted to maximize having Imp Gang Bosses, because they do more damage. They do 20% more damage than a regular imp. Now, single target choices are a little bit different. We're obviously going to want a Tyrant. We're going to want to sink 2 points into our Soulbound Tyrant. And then this is where we get a little bit of variation. For those of you that have been keeping up with Warlock, especially Demonology, you'll know that we'd lost Demonic Consumption and instead have gained Reign of Tyranny. Now, Demonic Consumption relied on stamina scaling and how much health we had, which meant that there was, especially with the advent of things like Soulburn returning, possibilities for Warlocks to properly kick the ass out of how much health we had in order to do really big damage. Because it kind of double dips. The more health we have, the more health our pets have. The more health our pets have, the more that was siphoned. And you kind of get the gist. It follows through. Reign of Tyranny, on the other hand, actually just goes off wild imps and greater demons. So, reading the tooltip then, active wild imp grants 1 stack of demonic servitude. Active greater demons grant 3 stacks of demonic servitude. Demonic Tyrant deals 5% additional damage for each stack of demonic servitude active at the time of his summon. Essentially, Reign of Tyranny now means, quite literally, the more demons you have out, whether it be imps, Felguard, Fellstalkers, or Dreadstalkers, sorry, your Nether Portal, and anything else that's summoned, whether it be your Vile Fiend, or Inner Demons, whatever it may be, Reign of Tyranny is going to just go, right, okay, you have 14 demons out, this is the percentage you've got. That's how much more damage you're doing. Which means there is going to be a limit, especially early on, as to how strong your Tyrant's going to be. Because the focus isn't going to be on having really giga Chad Tyrants anymore. It's actually going to be just before you summon your Tyrant. So in terms of PI, where we use our PI might actually move. Alternatively, having something like Grand Warlock's design, it's Wilfred's. We just get to keep Wilfred's and power on through. Now, don't know if it's a UI error, but on the beta currently, Reign of Tyranny's number will continue to stack through the longer you remain in combat. It doesn't reset, essentially, and I don't know if that's a UI error or not. But generally speaking, especially early doors, I'm likely to just, say, play with Wilfred's, which opens up our legendary options. If you wanted to keep using Wilfred's as a legendary, though, then obviously use Reign of Tyranny. But, as we'll discuss when we get into the rotation section, our damage focus has moved considerably in terms of where we want to be. And with the final point, it goes into Antoran armaments. your Felguard just deals 20% additional damage, and given that is our pet that is out full time, things like Grimmer of Synergy, things like that, it stacks. And the fact that Soul Strike will also cleave will help. But in this particular build, because you have Reign of Tyranny, you might want the extra demon. The difference is, by having Summon Vile Fiend versus Soul Strike, you have this situation based on how many shards are you generating. Like, if you have a fair amount of haste, which we do in the pre-patch, we have quite a bit of haste compared to what we will have at the start of Dragonflight, Summon Vile Fiend may be better, especially in a Fated Raid setting. Because you'll have the affixes, you'll have the more haste, you'll be able to pump and generate your shards at an easier pace, whereas Soul Strike generates you a shard. It's another ability that you'll have to weave in every 10 seconds as you go through your rotation, but it is a shard generator, which means more Hand of Gul'dans, and maybe a kind of halfway house, essentially, in terms of which is actually more efficient over the course of a fight in terms of how many demons are summoned at the time of a Reign Tyranny. Because remember, it's a 3 stacks of demonic servitude if you have a greater demon out. So a Vile Fiend is worth 3 imps. But if you're able to get out an extra Hand of Gul'dan because you're soul striking ahead of your Tyranny, then it doesn't matter. It's then a case of which is going to deal you more damage. Having Vile Fiend cast once every 45 seconds or 4 soul strikes. And that's a decision you'd have to make, or is a choice that is made through tuning. But this generally is a really good go-to single target build. And having covered both the builds, let's have a quick discussion or showcase of them in a single target and kind of what numbers are looking like at the moment with rotation. So just showing the build quickly. Obviously, this is the single target build that we've just discussed. Let's have a look and see how it performs in a damage setting. For the sake of arguments, we are going to be using this as Reign of Tyranny with the Wilfred's Legendary equipped, primarily because I don't have the other ones crafted to play around with on the PTR. So let's get into it. Start with a Demon Bolt. We're then going to want a Dreadstalkers. We are going to want to quickly move that to there. Summon a Tyrant, Hand of Gul'dan. And you can kind of see, I have Soul Strike built in, and the damage is a little bit on the low end. But not too bad in the grand scheme of things. Like, it is ramping, and this is something that Demonology is going to do. As we go through the fight, you'll find out that your first burst, as it were, is going to be a lot lower, because a lot of what we're after, and a lot of where our damage comes from, is actually going to come from the ramping elements. And that's having lots of imps out, our Dreadstalkers, and just kind of generally rotating through, because we have a much more of a menagerie type profile now. With the change from demonic consumption to Reign of Tyranny, our tyrants have kind of been muted slightly. It's not drastic in the change, but you can see that because we're now in full swing, we're now in a position where our tyrant has more imps to play with, and as a result is doing more damage, or will be doing more damage. We'll just let this play out slightly. And then, as you can see, we have 21 imps out, but can't implode them, sadly. So it's not too shabby. But you can see that our breakdown in terms of damage, a lot of it is coming from the imps. Imps, Dreadstalkers, Dreadstalker melee normally, our Felguards, melee attacks, and then we have our Tyrant and our Demon Bolts. Like, we had 2 casts of Tyrant there, and it was still only 7.9% of our damage. A lot of it has come from our imps, which is a huge change from what we're used to currently, where we have these like really giga empowered Tyrants and their Tyrant windows. Part of this will be because of things like Felsunder, increasing the damage that our Fel imps do, having Imp Gang Boss, and the fact that our wild imps are naturally doing more damage as a result of it, but also because we can't hyper buff our demonic tyrants anymore. Not really. But having something like Soul Strike and remembering to use it kind of on cooldown definitely increases how many imps we're throwing out compared to normal, because we are swimming in shards compared to currently in terms of just how many shard generators we've got. Or, as you saw as I was going through that rotation there were points where I was trying to get to 0 shards so that I could summon my Tyrant in an effective way to prevent wastage, but was in fact still at 2-3 shards anyway because they were just refunding themselves. This is further amplified by things like Demonic Meteor. Hand of Gul'dan has deals 5% damage, additional damage, and has a 5% chance per soul shard spent to refund a shard. So we can get a lot of imps now, and obviously this can only be further exaggerated if you were to also have something like Inner Demons, where you're passively summoning imps and demons around you anyway. There is a honourable mention in terms of a Demon Bolt build as a result of this, where you don't actually have any points in Soulbound Tyrant, and you instead have Power Siphon, Fel Covenant, and this is your Bale Spider's Burning Core situation, where Shadow Bolt increases the damage of your Demon Bolt, and you can end up in a situation like this, where your Tyrant doesn't actually generate you any shards, but because you have both Inner Demons and Power Siphon anyway, you don't really need to worry about it. The only problem is with having Fel Covenant or Bale Spider's Burning Core is obviously maintaining the buff for your Shadow Bolts to increase your Demon Bolt damage, especially if you're swimming in Demon Core procs anyway. So it's something to bear in mind. Now let's move on to the AoE demonstration and wrap this video up, because I appreciate it's getting to be a bit of a long one again. So going into the AoE build we've discussed, we're going to hit these 3 target dummies. We are using the Implosive Legendary, because again, Tyrant isn't a massive part of this, so much so that we could actually pull the point out of Tyrant and go into something like Imp Gang Boss or whatever. But for now, we'll play it this way, and we have Implosive potential. Unfortunately, one thing to caveat is obviously these 3 targets are quite spread, which means for something like Guillotine, we can get 2 targets, and if we aim it well, we can get all 3, if only just. So there may be points where, as I do this, I aim it a little bit to one side and don't get it square on. But let's get into it and see how things look. So, pets on assist. Let's get this ball rolling. Get the Tyrant out. We drop that in. We implode because we want the haste. And then we just start pushing the damage. And remembering to Soul Strike, because we do have the Antoran Armaments Cleave. Now, the main challenge with Implosive Potential is obviously ensuring that we have the haste buff up at all times. This is something that's going to be easier with weak auras and stuff during the live version, because as you can see, I don't have any of my weak auras that I have traditionally currently, but still, the damage is respectable. But you can see just how much of an emphasis is currently being placed on our Dreadstalkers. This is both due to having Grim Inquisitor's Dread Calling and the additional haste we get from having our Implosive Potential. This can be further altered if we wanted to play around with having a chance to get our dogs be back free. So for the sake of that, we had 40% of our damage, or 48 if you include its melee, being done by the Dreadstalkers themselves. And for an honourable mention, let's actually play around slightly, because the Tyrant itself, if we have a quick look, our Tyrant actually, scroll down, was our 13th in terms of damage there. Our Soul Cleave was doing more. So really, Demonic Tyrant didn't do all that well there, which, you know, to be expected. But yeah, so let's go into Hounds of War. And is there somewhere where we can drop a point from? Let's drop 1 point from Demonic Calling. So we have a 5% chance to reset the cooldown of Dreadstalkers. Let's actually keep it. No, we do actually need to do that. Moron. Yeah, let's have this as the build. Not a perfect build. Ideally, I'd prefer to have 2 points in Demonic Calling, but it's not too shabby. So let's see what it looks like if we don't have a Tyrant, but we instead have a chance to double or have extra dogs out by resetting the cooldown. So let's get this on the road. So 30k was the ballpark marker. Get that out. Get that out. Get that out. We're going to want to Handicle down. We're going to want to throw that there. Throw that there. Handicle down. Shadow Bolt. Obviously, it is a low chance to have them reset, but potentially increasing the amount of dog damage that we have would be nice, if not just a little bit funny and memey. So let's see if we can't do it. So we managed to get the dogs back in time there so that we could have had 2 dogs out, but all this does is potentially shorten the cooldown, so you're not waiting as long. It does show, as you can see, that we're actually doing more dog damage this way around, with 43% being just Dreadbite directly from our dogs. Which makes sense when you consider that we're obviously casting them more often, especially over the course of a fight or a dungeon. Let's get some more out. Another early reset. And for a second there, we actually had 2 sets of dogs out. Very, very briefly, but we did. And we're going to have another set of 2 dogs out. And another. So if we pull our pets back, just implode those imps and get rid of them. We have 50% of our damage done there through our Dreadstalkers, with 7.8% being done by the actual melee and 43% done by the actual Dreadbite itself. So pretty nice. Little bit of a change using Houndmasters, but honestly, given how that played, I think it would take a little bit more time to worry about. And generally speaking, I'd probably just keep the point in Tyrant and be able to extend the duration of the demons that we have out while also increasing their damage while the Tyrant's out. Gives us a little bit of extra single target as well in Mythic Plus scene. But all in all, not too bad and gives us a few options kind of to play around and mess with during the pre-patch while we enjoy the new spec and while we get to grips with it ahead of Dragonflight. And that brings the video to an end. Hopefully you guys have liked it and it helps. Please do comment below if you have any other questions about demonology or you want to discuss things. And I will see you all in the destruction guide and hopefully in game. Catch you all later, folks. Have a good one.